2 days after the invasion began,
Wow.
I found myself on the ground there. And I was so sure that I was ready for this, so sure that I understood what was going on in the world. Quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing.
G'day, I'm Lachlan Cartwright. Welcome back to the Breaker Pod. This week we are downtown at Tucci's, NoHo's premier fine dining Italian experience. Cheers to the owner, Max Tucci, for inviting us down. If you would like your venue featured on the Breaker Pod, get in touch. Breaker at breakermedia.com. My guest today has been on the front lines of some of the world's biggest stories, from Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the coverage of the war in the Middle East. Robert Sherman was there. He's a correspondent for NewsNation. He also covers the White House. And now he has his first book out, Lessons from the Front, a rookie war correspondent in Ukraine and Israel. Robert, welcome to the Breaker Pod.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
It's good to have you on. What are the lessons from the front?
I hope that this ends up being the most relatable book that people can read on Ukraine and the Middle East, because it's really not a geopolitical book. It's really a book about what happens when you think you understand the world and you're so sure of yourself, and then the world humbles you. And then you find yourself in all these situations staring into the eyes of people who have seen so much, been displaced by war. And it's from the perspective of a kid who's 25 years old.
Wow, you were 25 when you were parachuted into your first conflict zone.
Yeah.
Where was that?
Yeah, that was Ukraine.
Wow.
That was Ukraine.
As that whole situation started to erupt.
2 days after the invasion began,
Wow.
I found myself on the ground there. And I was so sure that I was ready for this, so sure that I understood what was going on in the world. Quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing. And
That's what I realize every day of the week, by the way, when I'm running a Breaker Media.
I give you an example. It was like our first day in Ukraine, and we ended up getting buzzed by a couple of fighter jets. And with my producer, Bartley Price, who does know what he's doing.
Okay.
He's been in Iraq, Afghanistan, he's been in some very dangerous situations. So he's, diving out the door, getting down. So I'm looking out the window like, oh, it's the Blue Angels are here. It's just like, oh, probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah, maybe not.
So it's a lot of the things that you learn along the way. And what I ended up finding is, one, didn't know much about the world.
Right.
Had so much to learn. That snobby kid, who thought that he was so certain about everything, he definitely had his humble pie. But then you also learn about what's important. You learn about the value of time, when time is of the essence in these situations. You learn the importance of home and family when people lose theirs and they can't go home.
Right.
And you learn the importance of humility. And, and I believe that is at the root of understanding. In a complex society that we live in, recognizing what you don't know and being humble about all of that. And that's how I try and carry forward now in all the reporting that I do, from that humble kind of perspective.
What attracted you to conflict reporting?
I stumbled into it,
Right.
to be honest with you. This was never something that was on my radar. I'd gotten my start doing politics at the local level and at the national level, and had been doing that for so long, and that was really my bread and butter. And then all of a sudden, this war broke out in Ukraine, and I don't even know why. I stuck my hand up that day and volunteered to go. I thought it was important to be there. And now it has really sparked my curiosity about the world, because it exposed what I didn't know. And now it's made me ask the question, well, what else don't I know that's out there? And that's where my drive is today, to discover more about the world.
What's the current state of play in Ukraine? What would our audience and our viewers not be aware of that you have a better grip on the state of play right now there?
It is probably the fastest moving conflict in terms of the development of technology that we have seen in the modern era. It was just in the Donbass region a couple of weeks ago, and we were reporting inside one of these Ukrainian drone labs that was on the front lines, where...
What is that like?
It's just like they're taking you to a secret location,
Right.
They're just a couple miles away from the front lines, and you see ground zero of where the latest developments in warfare are taking place.
Because when we think of warfare, we think more of conventional warfare, right?
Yeah.
And not of, I think, as you said, these kind of, drone missions.
Right. And, drones, to be clear, drones like what any photographer might use, or what a hobbyist or enthusiast would use, except rigged with explosives.
Right.
And that's what they're using on the front lines. And to see the way that warfare is advancing, to see in turn the vulnerabilities that the United States, even to an extent by its own admission, has made in recent months with the way that this warfare is evolving. I mean, it's just overwhelming to see. And I mean, you are watching the way that the rules of the battlefield are being rewritten again and again, and technology advances. Then it becomes obsolete just a few weeks later. I've never seen anything like it.
How do you mentally prepare for going into some of these situations, which are highly risky and dangerous? And you're a young bloke, you're 29, you've got family here. How do you sort of get your head into the game in terms of going into some of these hotspots?
I mean, I think back to the first time, that I had pitched the idea of going to Ukraine back in February 2022. And I'd pitched this idea to one of our anchors who had been in all these war zones before. And here's my idea, we go into Ukraine, we're going to drive to the front lines. And he said, if you do that the way that you said you're going to do that, you're going to get yourself and everybody killed. And that really had an impact on me, because now there's a liability. I mean, inevitably in the United States, I mean, you watch the Hollywood films and you see, the first-person shooter games, and you think, I mean, despite our best intentions, war from a 40,000-foot view looks like a game. When someone says something like that to you, it becomes real. And then you see that up close, and it becomes real. I mean, it does end lives, and it does change lives. So everything is done fastidiously. Every move is made meticulously, and that's what I appreciate about NewsNation so much, is that safety is always paramount. And there have always been dicey situations, but we've gone into everything with the utmost care. And
you go into these situations with using iPhones. It would be back in the day that you would load a plane up full of equipment, of cameras and lights and mics, and now you're out shooting on iPhones. Tell me a bit about that.
I actually would make the argument that it's probably the safest way to do it, because you're not encumbered by all of the large equipment. I mean, especially for a photographer, which is in conflict zone reporting probably the most dangerous profession, because in many cases
you can't see what's going on.
Exactly.
You can just see that view through the camera.
Exactly, and they're backing up and they're exposed. Whereas with an iPhone, something like that, you're much more nimble. And then there's the other element of it as well. I don't know if you've had this experience. People tend to be much more candid when they're standing in front of an iPhone,
as opposed to an old
big
school
camera.
Big camera. Right?
I see that again and again. People seem to open up. People seem, to not get the stage fright. Just tell you exactly what they're feeling, and that's what we're going for in journalism. Is the rawness, the reality,
the authenticity. Yeah. From one conflict zone to another, the White House. You are a White House correspondent for NewsNation. Donald Trump did make ending the war in Ukraine a campaign promise. Has he lived up to that?
I think that he has, even by his own admission, said that it is proving more difficult than he initially anticipated that it was. And part of that is the motivation of individual actors.
Like
states,
Putin.
Like Russia.
Right.
And, I mean, it does not seem as though that Russia is quite there yet, in which they're ready to make a deal. Because you listen to what they're saying.
And then you see what they're doing.
Right.
They're two different things.
I mean, they're saying it's like, we'll end the war if Ukraine gives up the entirety of the Donbass region. And, I was in the room with Zelensky just a couple of months ago, in which he was talking about you cannot give up those strategic heights in the Donbass. If we give those up, then it's just a couple of years until Russia goes back in. Whether that proves to be true or not, that all remains to be seen. I mean, you have two sides right now that feel as though that this is a moment in which they can't give in.
What challenges are there covering this White House, this administration? We've seen changes that have happened to the pool. We've seen changes that have happened in the briefing room. We've seen Trump lash out at certain reporters. We've seen certain outlets have access stripped away. What are the challenges that you've witnessed, and what are the challenges that you've faced?
I mean, I would say that the biggest thing is the speed in which everything moves. It's because, what, a decade ago would be a headline story is now the number 7 story of the day.
It just moves on
so quickly. I mean, the table looks different depending on where you sit. I mean, I have seen, conversely, some outlets have talked about their access going away. I've also seen access opened up to new voices and new outlets as well. So, I mean, it totally matters on perspective. But I mean, for me, it's the speed in which everything moves. I mean, this is different than anything we've covered before.
How has your time in the field in covering conflicts informed your coverage of the White House and of Donald Trump?
Well, I
because
mean,
you kind of have this unique lens where you're out, in Ukraine or in Israel, but then you're also there at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and having the opportunity to ask questions.
I mean, that's actually, how I end this book is talking about is, the end of the book comes down to the campaign trail and election night. And, I viewed covering politics and covering the campaigns and talking to voters as my expertise before. Having my humble pie consumed in Israel and Ukraine really caused me to do an internal audit of what I thought was my strength, which was covering politics. I've spent a lot more time listening to the average voters and, really intently listening to their pain. And my strategy every time that I've covered the White House is to try and communicate the sentiments of voters as opposed to focusing on, the Washington, D.C.-esque question. I try and listen to what are people in my home state of Ohio talking about. I went to school in Indiana. What are people in Indiana talking about?
And it's usually a lot different to what people in New York or LA or DC are talking about.
I mean, I've seen it firsthand in DC. People are talking about, any drama that might be happening behind the scenes in the Oval Office. I talk to everyday Americans, and they're talking about, well, my 401k just went down 10%. Let's focus on that. That seems to be where people's heads are at the most. And so that has been my focus is those Main Street issues, what people are talking about at their kitchen tables, focusing on those in the White House press briefing room.
One of the most enlightening things I've done in my time in the States is 2 road trips. One was from LA back to New York, and one was from New York to LA. And everywhere I went, I go to a dive bar or a diner, I buy someone a bud or a cup of coffee.
I love that.
And what their concerns were and their issues and their problems was far different to what people in, as I said, New York and LA and DC were experiencing. You've traveled on Air Force One. I'm always curious, what is that experience like? Everything from the food to what goes on that plane. I mean, it's sort of a Willy Wonka ticket to get on there.
I mean, as you can imagine, more security than flying on a commercial.
I thought as much. Yeah, right. Okay. It's not just one sort of TSA bloke waving you through a metal detector.
No, it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, we took off from Joint Base Andrews, and I mean, we flew down to West Palm Beach. It is nice because Air Force One, is the most important plane that any of these airports are dealing with.
Sure. Priority landing.
Priority landing. Now, I've been on the other side of that before in which I wasn't on Air Force One.
And you're just
Force
frozen.
There, and it's just like, we're going to be stuck here for hours. But, I mean, being on the plane itself, I think it's like on the way down, they served lobster tacos.
Oh, lobster tacos.
We weren't
delicious.
Struggling on that flight at all. And we were talking about this before. It's, I'm a kid from Cleveland, Ohio, and it's just like, how am I here? How am I in this place?
I'm a kid from the suburbs of Melbourne, and I have the same response sometimes when I'm in those situations.
Yeah.
You had a couple of years at Fox.
I did.
Before you got to NewsNation. Talk to me about sort of the transition from Fox to NewsNation and your time working at Fox News.
I was at Fox News for 2 years, and admittedly, I was pretty bottom of the totem pole there, but I was boots on the ground for a lot of major moments. I was, shooting a lot of my own content and editing a lot of my own content, but I found myself at half a dozen hurricanes, wildfires, riots, campaign trails. And it was an opportunity to really see the country. It was the first time that I'd been on planes that much and traveled that much, to meet people across the country. And it was a great experience. And the way that I ended up at NewsNation is that effectively my boss's boss, Sherry Gretsch, ended up going...
a former Fox exec.
And ended up going to head up NewsNation. And I believe that she's the most brilliant mind in cable news today. And I think that she understands, we are at a time in which certainly there's divisiveness in the country, and there are a lot of Americans who are looking for the even-handed, down the middle, here's what's going on, news, not noise kind of perspective. Right. And I think that she's very connected with the heartland of America, where I am from, and, really tries to speak to those kind of viewers. And so, I mean, it's been a real privilege to be a part of this
that's
operation.
NewsNation's mantra is news, not noise. How does that shape your reporting?
It's so important. I mean, I think it's the question that we go into every time. I mean, I give you an example. I remember I was boots on the ground for all 4 of then former President Trump's arraignments, now President Trump. And, some of the editorial conversations that we would have is, every time you're at these media events, you're standing next to other reporters, right? Sure. So the reporter next to us, I think it was in Miami, was talking about how, Miami police are preparing for 8,000 protesters to come here to this courthouse. Our mindset is, who actually shows up,
right. Sure.
And, what we kind of found at a lot of those events is that there were more members of the press and more members of law enforcement than demonstrators. So, don't hype it up more than it is.
Right.
Call the balls and strikes and show people, hey, 120 people showed up to this thing waving flags. Nothing got out of control. Nothing needs to be hyped up. Just call it like it is.
It's a pretty interesting time for cable news. Mm-hmm. I was at a press breakfast with MS Now, Rebecca Cutler, as they're going through this transformational time. I was at another one at CNN with Mark Thompson. Equally, they are going through this moment with their streaming service. How do you see NewsNation's long-term jeopardy in all of this?
Well, I think that NewsNation...
And obviously you've got Fox,
of course,
success and ratings winner. And, how is NewsNation in this ecosystem?
I think that we're really well positioned because on the one hand, it is a small but scrappy team.
Yeah.
And I think that good journalism is always done through scrappiness.
Us breaking media.
Yeah, exactly, right?
One bloke operation.
Yeah. And it's just, whenever we're overseas, I'm using the phones, trying to find smarter ways in this ecosystem here, but I really think that NewsNation is so over the target when it comes to what people are talking about in the country. Again, getting back to brass tacks, the kitchen table issues, how is my family's bottom line being impacted? And sometimes, with what you read and what you hear, people have a very negative sentiment towards what's going on in the country. My experiences traveling the United States, I am an unabashed optimist for the future of the United States. And that's because of the people who we meet on the road. People who at the end of the day, they care about their families, they care about their church, they care about their communities, and they want their kids to have a brighter tomorrow than they have today. And I think that that's really at the heart of America. So I'm personally very optimistic for the future.
You talked about the scrappy nature of what you do and using the iPhones. There's a huge push to independent journalism right now. We've seen a lot of big names from TV go off to places like Substack and YouTube, Jim Acosta, Don Lemon, and a bunch of others. Is that something that appeals to you? Do you have any desires to strike out on your own?
Not at this juncture. I'm really happy where I am right now. And a big part of that is my curiosity has never hummed more than it does now. Just based upon what I've seen over the last couple of years.
What do you think? Is it just the moment we're living in?
Yeah, I would say I tell everyone, when I went to Ukraine, I realized how much more I had to learn about the world. And when I went to the Middle East, I realized I didn't know much of anything at all. And the more you see, the less you know. And now it's everywhere I go, I feel like I'm learning something new and just humbly taking it all in. And I just think that there's so much more to learn about the world. And NewsNation has given me a great opportunity in order to really capitalize on that curiosity.
How is the media's coverage of these hotspots evolving? What trends do you notice when you're out in the field at some of these places?
That's a good question. I would say, I think also like the way that this is done. I remember getting into Israel on October 8th, and NewsNation had precisely 2 people on the ground there, and other networks had 13 crews,
and
of
fixers
3 or 4
translators, and I'm sure.
And you don't need that. You don't need that level of apparatus in order to just talk to people and just get to the heart of what's going on. And so I think that is the way that this is all going to change here very quickly. It's less about the crazy production, and I think you're starting to see a return to brass tacks, a return to the blocking and tackling, or at the very least, that's what needs to happen in this ecosystem today. Because to your point, many of those independent journalists, they are getting to the everyday people. They are getting to the heart of the story, whether they're independent journalists who are more right of center, left of center, down the middle. They are doing things that some of the more traditional outlets aren't doing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that what NewsNation has done a great job of is, being one of those, few larger outlets, that is really focusing on that is really focusing on the hearts and minds of people.
Years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting Michael Ware, the legendary Aussie war correspondent who was out in Iraq for many, many years. And Michael's spoken about this publicly. He has written about it, the toll it took on him and his family covering such, intense, warfare. Is that something that you're conscious of? Is that, how do you sort of try and ensure that, you take breaks from this and the impact of being in some of these very intense situations doesn't get to you? Because I could see I saw how it did with Michael, and I'm sure it is very, very intense when you're in these places.
I mean, at certain levels, I just emphasize that, and I say this in my book as well, I have the privilege that I get to go home.
Yeah.
I mean, when the fighting rages on in Ukraine, I get to go home to Cleveland, Ohio, or the Middle East, I get to go home. There are a lot of people here who are living through this on a day-to-day basis, and they don't get to go home. Mm-hmm. I mean, they are right in the middle of it. So I emphasize that those are the people who are really living it. In terms of the impact that it's had on me, I would say I'm even more of an optimist than I have been before, just seeing people and the way people come together. But I also grew up a little bit more quickly than I would have liked to. I mean, being 25 years old.
You feel like you're 29? You feel like you've aged like me having a bloody startup?
Yeah,
you're more like 49?
Milk,
and talk to me more about the audience as well. How do you think their appetite is for international news? There is so much going on the domestic front. Right. I have people come to me and say, Lox, I've totally tuned out of the news.
Totally.
I can't handle it. I can't deal with it. What do you think the punters, the audience, and you have a newsletter called Frontlines,
yes.
right? So I'm sure you interact with your audience. How do you think their appetite is for what is going on the foreign front?
Yeah, I think that's where it comes down to, because, I mean, just foreign affairs at the macro level, I mean, it doesn't necessarily impact people directly. At a fundamental level, I know many Americans, they really care about dollars and cents. One way or another, tax dollars are going to the situation that's abroad. And then I think of the other element as well. There are American troops that are in eastern Poland. There are American troops that cycle through the Baltics.
Families here in the States.
And that's what I think about. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, we were in Israel last year when there were all these attacks that were going on U.S. bases around the Middle East. And you had that drone attack that was carried out by militias in Iraq, which killed 3 U.S. service members in Jordan. That's the connection. That's what I think about, because right, wrong, or indifferent, there are thousands of brave men and women in United States uniforms that are spread out across the globe. Mm-hmm. And it does impact a lot of people from that element there. So those are the things that I think about, that, putting the American viewer, where are those connections there? Because to your point, I mean, what's going on in, I mean, pick a country, Latvia, for example, I mean, it needs to tie back into the audience and show where that impact is actually felt.
Are there any stories or regions you're hungry to cover next?
I mean, there are 2 places that I really want to go to solely for the purpose of quenching my own curiosity. One is Russia and the other is Iran. And I mean, one of the things that I have found is the world does look black and white when you're at a 40,000 foot view. But when you get to the micro level and you start looking people in the eyes, things get complicated. And I would really be so humbly grateful for the opportunity to meet the people of Russia, to meet the people of Iran, just to understand why the world is the way it is. I have hypotheses, I have ideas, but I want to see it with my own eyes, personally.
As we like to say here at Breaker, boots on the ground.
Boots on the
Reporting
ground.
always wins the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Robert Sherman, thank you for coming on the Breaker pod. You can catch this pod on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe. You can also listen to us on Spotify and Apple, and wherever you get your pods. You can subscribe to Breaker at breakermedia.com. That's breakermedia.com. And we'll be back next week. Cheers.